He didn't nudge me to take the leap in the very beginning when I was just starting out, just beginning to build things, when it honestly would have been reckless to do so. But he also didn't nudge me to take the leap once everything was so rock solid that doing so wouldn't require any trust at all. But rather, he nudged me to take the leap when I had built a firm foundation, but that leap was still just outside of my comfort zone, so as to require me to depend on him. Hello and welcome back to my channel. I literally can't even believe that I'm making this video today. I have a huge life update for you guys, which, as you can see from the title, is that I quit my full-time corporate job. This is like a full-on God story and testimony that has literally been 9 years in the making. And that is why I wanted to make a video sharing this story, because it is a testimony. It points to just the character of God, and it speaks to how he is so intimately involved in every detail of his life. His timing is perfect, his plan is perfect, his ways are not always our ways, but they are good, and he is just so present in all of the things. And so I want to tell you this whole story to hopefully encourage you and just point to the character of who our God is. And let's go ahead and start from the very beginning. Before we do, if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to my channel and then give this video a thumbs up if you find it encouraging, which I pray that you do. But back to the beginning. So we have got 18-year-old Kaci, who is starting at college. I went to Biola University down in Southern California, and I had no idea what I wanted to do. So going into college as an 18-year-old, I didn't know what I wanted to study, and I ended up going in undeclared. But then towards the end of my freshman year, I decided to pick communication studies as my major because some of the classes I had taken around that I was really enjoying. But honestly, mainly because I knew that the communication studies major was pretty general, and I really didn't know what I wanted to do. And so I figured by picking that major, I was kind of keeping my options open. But going to Biola, everybody has a Bible minor in addition to whatever your major is. And by the end of my freshman year, having taken some Bible classes, I was loving all of them. And so when I met with the academic advisor to declare the communication studies major, they were basically just telling me that the communication studies major is pretty small in terms of units. And so in order to still meet the graduation requirement in terms of the number of units, I was gonna have like 30 random units basically that I needed to take to meet that requirement. And I was like, well, I don't wanna take just a bunch of these random classes that aren't going toward anything. If I need these 30 additional units, why don't we just up my Bible minor to a Bible major? So I'm able to take more Bible classes, which was a great idea aside from Greek, because Greek about did me in, but I was super thankful that I did that. And so it's really cool to think about how I sort of just randomly picked these majors and randomly stumbled into them. But nothing is ever random with God, and especially thinking about what it is I do now, the fact that I have a Bible degree and a communication studies degree, it's just really cool to see God's hand in that he was so evident in that and orchestrating all of that. And so that is what I studied. But fast forward to the end of college, I'm graduating, and I had no idea what I wanted to do. I feel like I had this pull in my heart, this desire to do ministry, but I didn't really know what that was gonna look like. I didn't really envision myself working at a church necessarily. At that point, I had started my blog already, but not like the current blog. It was like the original first kind of draft of that. I had started it when I was studying abroad in London the first half of my senior year of college, and I had only written a couple posts, but I didn't, really know that that could be a career or anything. This was kind of before like influencers or content was what it is now. So I know that I had this pull to ministry, but I had no idea what I wanted to do. And for any of you who are facing graduation and you just feel this pressure to have that answer when people are like, so what are your plans? And you're like, I have no idea. Like, it is okay. God is going to make each of your steps clear as you just continue to walk in step with him. He's going to lay out the next one as you need to take it. But I remember that pressure. I felt so much anxiety when people would ask me like, what are you going to do? Because I had no idea. But your girl had quite a bit of student loans from going to a private Christian university. And so I was like, I just need a job. Like, even if I don't know what the job is going to be, I just need a job. I just need to start making money and paying off these loans. And so I was figuring out what that was going to be. And then right as that first summer after graduation started, so I graduated in May of 2014, and right around that time I ended up getting a call from the youth pastor at the church that I grew up in the Bay Area. So I was in Southern California, that was in Northern California, and he was like, hey, so we need more counselors for summer camp this year for our high school students. Any chance you're free and you want to come up and, serve for a week? And I had always been drawn to the idea of doing youth ministry, of serving in youth ministry, of mentoring younger girls girls, but honestly the idea was so intimidating to me, and so this opportunity came up and I was really scared, but I was like, I feel like I need to do this. And so I went to camp with them, and it was just the most amazing week ever, and I was so pumped on it, and I loved doing it. And the pastor, he was like, you know, if you move up to the Bay after graduation, like you could continue to serve in youth ministry and be like a regular youth leader. So it's like, okay, something to think about. And then about a week after camp, I got a call from my Aunt Karen. So both my Aunt Karen and my mom worked for and still work for Northern California's utility company, and they had worked there for a really long time and have amazing jobs. And it just so happened that at this time, my aunt had an opening come up in her department for a temp job. And so she called me and she was like, hey, I know you're looking for a job. Like, it's only a 6-month temporary position, but it's, you know, a well-paying job. You can kind of get your foot in the door. It could potentially lead to something longer term. And it just so happened, which if you watch my Esther series, you know that whenever something is a just so happened, like there is no such thing with God. His hand is in everything. But it just so happened that this role was it was a communications role. So the department she was in at the time, that department, it was focused on getting out different gas safety messages. And so I would be able to continue to learn more about communications and work in that, and even kind of like dip my toe into marketing stuff. And so it just really seemed like God was opening up these doors for me to move back home to the Bay Area. Here I had this opportunity to serve in youth ministry, and that was something that my heart was really drawn toward. And then also this job literally fell in my lap, and it was like, again, a well-paying job. I was going to be able to start paying off student loans, and in a field too that I was interested in learning more about. And so moved back home, and in August of 2014 I started working at that job. And then 6 months later, in February of 2015, that temporary job did turn into a full-time job, and that has been the job that I've been working at this whole time. And it's kind of changed and morphed a little over the years. It shifted a little bit, but essentially that's what I've been doing. I was working at a utility company as in sort of a communications specialist role, and it was really beautiful to see God's hand in that, because I ended up starting my blog like officially about a year after starting working full-time in October of 2015. And it was really cool to see how things I was learning about just communication and marketing here in this job, I was able to apply with, you know, starting my blog and all of that, and also things that I already knew from being in the content world, I was able to apply to my job. And so it was just like this beautiful thing of being able to learn from both and apply things to both. And so for the next 7 years, that's exactly what I did, is both things. I worked this full-time job, and then I also started working on this blog and just sharing things I was learning in my walk with God to hopefully encourage people. And when I first started out with my blog, with content, there was so much that I had to learn, and I wasn't making a dime off of it in the beginning. Like I said, I didn't even really know when I started that it could be a career, but as it continued to grow and I saw that there was that potential, it was sort of like this dream in my heart of like, man, I love my job now, and I love that I get to do this now, but how cool would it be if this thing could grow? And maybe one day when I'm at the point where I'm married and I have kids, God willing, like I could do this thing and it would allow me to stay home with my kids, because being a mama, that has always been a dream of mine. And at this time, you know, when I started all of it, I was single as a Pringle. Tyler was not in the picture. Judah was obviously not in the picture. But there was this dream that in the future, maybe this thing could grow to the point where I could stay home with kids. And the thing that I really want to highlight in this whole story is just how perfect God's timing is, and how purposeful He is in everything that He does. Because again, when I first started out, there was so much that I had to learn, but as things grew, the harder and harder that it felt in some moments to manage both, to do both, you know, my blog and then YouTube eventually, when I technically started my channel in 2018, but it was like only a couple videos, and then I really started at the end of 2019. But it became harder and harder to juggle both that and then also working full-time and just wanting to give my all to both of those things. But then 2020 hit, and we all know what that was, the pandemic. And at that time we started working from home, which for me, that ended up cutting out a 40-minute commute to work both ways, which gave me a lot more time. And so by the grace of God, from that point when we started working at home to literally when I went on maternity leave last year, that was a 2.5-year period that God essentially gave me more time to still be able to do my full-time job, but also have more time to just pour into this ministry and to this business, and to learn how to really operate it on the fringes of having my full-time job. And having that full-time paycheck, that saw me through, you know, moving out into an apartment. If you've been following since then, you saw that whole journey. It saw me through planning our wedding, which, you know, being able to contribute to to that, and it's expensive, as you know, but not to mention even before that, it saw me through paying off my student loans, paying off my car. And so God, you know, there was just his provision was all through that. And even though there were times it was really hard to do both, I honestly feel like there was such a beauty and a blessing to having such a long period of time to be able to pour into content and this ministry here and just developing that, where there was zero pressure on it to provide any sort of income, that it could truly just be pouring my heart into it, but God was still providing also through this really amazing, awesome full-time job. But again, as things continued to grow and content began to require and involve more work, it did get harder and harder to do both. And there were times I felt really overwhelmed. And there was a moment in the spring of last year in 2022 where I was seriously considering, like, do I need to walk away? Do I need to quit? But I just never fully felt that release from God to take the leap at that time, which was really good because shortly after that, we found out we were pregnant with little Judah man. And so we just knew that having more of the stability of a full-time job was going to be really important for that time. And also knowing that the company I worked for offered a really generous maternity leave, paid maternity leave. And so because of that, and because of a couple other things that happened in our lives around that time, it ended up being so good that I didn't quit at that time. And it's just so clearly God's hand in that. So fast forward to October, I went on maternity leave. And like I said, I always dreamed of being a mama, of getting to stay home with my kids. But to be honest, at that point, as I was going on maternity leave, I didn't know if it was going to be possible not to go back. But while I was on maternity leave, God really grew things. And I shared this in a vlog a couple months back, but I was actually supposed to be done with my paid maternity leave at the end of March of this year. But honestly, everything just still felt so new at that time. Judah would have been almost 4 months old at that point, and sleep was pretty much still just not happening, not existent at that time. And I just was not at all ready to go back. And so as Tyler and I were thinking about it and praying through it, we ended up deciding that I was going to extend my maternity leave. And at that point it was going to be unpaid. And so basically how it worked is through July, I would be able to extend my leave and still have job protection. But at the end of July, come that point, at that point I would need to either quit or return to work. And so it was really nerve-wracking to think about going into unpaid leave. But that very first month that I didn't get a paycheck from my full-time job, I ended up making almost the exact same amount through content, literally almost down to the dollar. And to be honest, in the months since then, there's been some fluctuation because that's just the nature of working for yourself and the nature of content in particular. Sometimes you might work with the brand and not get paid out for a couple months. And so some months you might make less, but then other months you get all these payments at once and it's a lot more. It's not the same as having a consistent corporate paycheck where you're making the exact same amount and you're getting paid on the exact same day every month. But the fact that the very first time I didn't have a paycheck from my full-time job in literally over 8 years, that same month, it was almost exactly replaced by my content income. It just really felt like God was encouraging that leap of faith. And so as July approached, sleep did start to get better, but I just love being a mama so much, and it just became harder and harder to imagine not getting to be the primary one caring for him and having to pay somebody else to care for him so that I could go back to work. So Tyler and I were just talking about it and praying about it as a family, knowing this had always been a dream, knowing this had always been a goal. And so we just really began to think through what was most important to us as a family, and we came to the decision that me getting to be with Judah, me getting that time with Judah and getting to be the one being his primary caregiver, that was more important to us than making a little bit more money. And I want to give the disclaimer here that I know that everybody has different situations. For some people, the idea of going down to, you know, one income or having one parent stay home with the child, that's not something you have to even give a second thought. And for some people, that's literally not even an option. And so definitely not saying this is the right way or the only right way or any of that. But for us, we knew what it came down to is what was most important to us, because we knew that even if there were months where I made nothing from content, that we could live off of Tyler's income alone, but that it would just mean that we would budget a little bit more, that we wouldn't eat out as much, that maybe we wouldn't instantly get certain things that we wanted. And so for us, if it literally came down to a choice between eating out more and having more things versus time with Judah, that there was no way I could pass that up. And so it was a hard decision in the sense that, like, it was an amazing job that I was walking away from. It was amazing coworkers who I had worked with for literally almost a decade, and it was not an easy thing to think through. It was a decision that I really wrestled through. But at the end of the day, what I kept coming back to is that, you know, I can always get another job at some point in the future if I needed to, if I wanted to, but I can never get this time back with Judah. And I could just cry thinking about already how fast it's going. And I just want to once again point out God's wisdom in the timing of all of this, that he didn't nudge me to take the leap in the very beginning when I was just starting out, just beginning to build things, when it honestly would have been reckless to do so. But he also didn't nudge me to take the leap once everything was so rock solid that doing so wouldn't require any trust at all, but rather he nudged me to take the leap when I had built a firm foundation, but that leap was still just outside of my comfort zone, so as to require me to depend on him. So as Tyler and I prayed about it, we just really felt like this was the decision that God was leading us to, and it ended up making most sense for me to give my notice and officially quit at the very end of June, just like logistically and everything, because Tyler was actually starting a new job. He was coming on staff at our church here in San Diego. So when we first moved to San Diego, Tyler was working for his dad. His dad owns his own construction company doing really nice remodels on houses here in San Diego. But Tyler had previously been in ministry and just knew that he was called to continue to be in worship ministry. But we were just kind of knew that it could take some time to get to know churches in the area. And so as we were waiting to see where God would lead us and what doors he would open, he had been working for his dad, but he was starting a new job. So literally within a week, he started a new job and I quit my job that I had been at for a really long time. And honestly, even though I knew it was the right decision, it was so nerve-wracking to walk away from something that had been a stable, consistent paycheck for literally my entire 20s. It was also really emotional to walk away from coworkers who I had literally worked with for over a decade, who we had traveled together, we had built programs together, we had done all these things together and just been a part of each other's lives for so long. But it was really sweet. I got to go on some final team calls just to say goodbye to everybody, to thank them. I brought Judah with me on the little Zoom calls so they got to see him, and everybody kind of just had the same sentiment of, you know, we're really gonna miss working together, we're gonna miss you, but you are never going to regret a decision to have more time with your son. And so that was really encouraging to hear and really affirming and just sweet to get to say goodbye to everybody. And as of July 1st, I am officially no longer a corporate girly. Corporate Kaci is no more. Tyler was such a voice of truth and encouragement to me through all of this, because you can ask him how many times in those couple weeks leading up to my final day, even though I had already put in my notice, even though I knew in my heart that this was the right decision and the one that God was leading us to, but still how many times I questioned it and how many times I asked him, like, are you sure I'm doing the right thing? And said, like, you know, maybe I could try to like stick it out for one more year and do all the things and make it all work. And he would just say, like, you already have, you know, this whole full-time job of YouTube and content that you are called to. And first and foremost, this calling of motherhood. And like, yeah, maybe you could make it work to fit in another full-time job as well, and maybe you could make that happen, but like, what would the fruit of that be? And is that something you really want? And honestly checking me as well and saying, like, if one of the driving forces that you would try to keep doing both would be to have a little bit more money, well then, like, you can't serve two masters. You can't serve both God and money, and you know that God has called you to this, so we can trust him to provide in those things. And there was another Bible story he brought up that really was an encouragement to me. It's in 1 Kings 19, I believe. It's the call of Elisha to become a prophet, and basically God gives this call to Elisha to be a prophet, somebody who would speak his words to the people, God's words to the people. And Elisha previously had been a really successful farmer, so he had all these plows, all these oxen, all of just this wealth that he had used to run this business of being a farmer. And he actually goes and he burns the plows and he sacrifices the oxen, and it was this symbolic thing, as if to say that I know God is calling me to this new thing. And when God calls us to something, he provides for that thing, but that doesn't always mean that the calling is going to be easy. There's going to be challenges in that calling. There's going to be moments where maybe I question it, where it feels too hard, where I want to return to my previous life. But by me burning this plow, burning this oxen, I'm literally burning my opportunity, or getting rid of my opportunity or ability to turn back to that thing when the thing that God has called me to gets hard. I'm removing my ability to go back to my old way of thinking and living and being. And even on my hardest day, if I want to go back, there's nothing to go back to. And Tyler was like, we know that this is what God is calling us to as a family, what he's calling you to as a family. So we just got to to take the jump, take the leap, burn the plow, burn the oxen. Thank God for the purpose they had in that season of your life, but know that he is calling you to this new thing, and take away that temptation to turn back to it when things go hard. And it was so funny because literally, I think my final day was like a Friday or something. And I will say I'm somebody, like I say, who really wrestles with decisions and overthinking things. And I really wrestle with it, I feel like, until the decision is made. And usually once I take that leap and I make that decision, generally I feel the peace. And I definitely did after, you know, making everything official. But then that next Sunday, so like 2 days later, we're sitting in church and the sermon is being preached on this very passage and this very concept about burning the plow, burning the oxen, not turning back, but pressing forward ahead to the thing that God has called you to. And it was just such an affirmation of God being like, this is where I have you. This is the new season, the new chapter of being a mom, getting to focus on content. And so now, after 8 years of being a content creator, I can officially, for the first time, say that I am doing it full time. But honestly, I don't even want to say that I'm like a full-time YouTuber, because my heart is that I'm a full-time mama and I love what I'm called to here. I love creating content here. I love this ministry. But first and foremost, I'm a mom. And I think that was something that always drew me to getting to do this, is knowing that I can do this work that I love and that I'm called to, but I can kind of do it on my own time, what fits in our schedule when Judah is napping or sometimes after he's down for the night. And now that I am a mom, I feel like that's another beautiful thing that I've realized about God's just provision and this whole journey, this whole story about having the job before, is that yes, God used it to provide for me financially for such a long season, but he also used it to teach me how to do content and how to structure my schedule to do this work in the fringes. The thing is, I've never been able to focus all of my time on content because I was always doing it in sort of the fringe pockets of time around my full-time job. And not having that luxury was actually a blessing because it was preparation. Because now that I am a mom, I've already learned what it looks like to do this work in those fringe pockets of time while doing something else, while having another focus. So just know that there is purpose in literally everything that God does. The beautiful thing about God leading us into a new season is that when he leads us into a new season, there's also going to be new opportunities for trust. I made an entire video about this, my video on God's timing is perfect. But when God finally brings the Israelites into the promised land after they've been wandering in the wilderness, he also, through that new season, through that new chapter, also has for them new means of provision. Joshua 5 verses 11 and 12 says, "And the day after the Passover, on that very day, they ate the produce of the land, unleavened cakes, and parched grain. And the manna ceased the day after they ate the produce of the land. And there was no longer manna for the people of Israel, but they ate the fruit of the land of Canaan that year." So all throughout the wilderness, God has provided through the Israelites with this manna that falls from the sky. But then once they entered into the promised land, literally on that very day, it says the manna ceased. Now that they were in a new chapter, there was a new means of provision. And I think it could have been really easy for the Israelites to get caught up on that, to get caught up on, well, we don't have this manna anymore, and to rely on that, when in reality, the manna itself was never the provision. It was simply God's means of provision. God was always the provider. God was always the one taking care of them. And now that they were in this new season, this new chapter, he was going to be providing for them in a different way. There was no longer a need for the old means of provision once the new means of provision was introduced. And God wanted them to enter into a new season of partnership, of trust with them, because God always provides, but he doesn't always use the same means of provision. And he calls us to trust in him, not the manner of provision itself. So that is the full God story. I'm so thankful for God's timing, his provision, just his character. He is a good father who sees and knows. And I'm just so thankful that he's made a way for me to live out this dream of getting to be home with my baby, and God willing, future babies as well, and to get to do what I love and feel called to here. And I'm so thankful to you, because you being here is such a huge part of that being possible as well. And so thank you for listening to this full rambly story. I hope that it was encouraging to you. And a lot of my coworkers, when I told them that I wasn't coming back, they said that they were sad but not surprised. And so if you also saw this coming, let me know down in the comments. And I would love to hear from you. Is there a leap, some sort of leap in your life that you feel like God is stirring you to take? And if so, is he telling you to jump now or not yet? I would love to hear from you down in the comments, and I'm looking forward to reading through those. Thank you so much for being here, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.